Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC television podcast brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Casey. So today we have 4 topics lined up for you. As usual, we will be starting off with Marvel's Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Then we'll be making a shift to The Queen's Gambit, which has had its fair share of hype on Netflix. But I wanted to kind of do a little bit of an overview and maybe in the future kind of further elaborate. I had a lot of thoughts and ideas about the show, and I really wanted to kind of get them off my mind. So then after that, we'll be kind of looking at a few of my weekly sitcoms that I watch. The sitcoms have been in really rare form, in a really good way recently. So I kind of want to just address those. And then we'll be ending the show with The Wilds. Now, I believe I've very briefly mentioned The Wilds before, more so on the lines of when I compare it to Lost and Manifest. But definitely stay tuned for that. I think it's a very interesting show, and I'll definitely be going over the overview and maybe just the beginning details of the show. So yet again, as I said, we are going to kick it off with the newest episode of Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So that is Season 1, Episode 4. Now, this episode, I think, was truly the highlight of the season so far. As usual, you have your typical action and your typical Marvel quips, their little humor. I do know that a lot of people have really been enjoying Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I think it's been decent. I think I still have more of a preference to WandaVision. While yes, the early episodes of WandaVision were kind of more on the boring side because they were obviously setting a lot of stuff up. I think ultimately the way that the story dove into Wanda's internal problems. It was very much an internal issue. I think that's what I really liked about it. There was growth, there was development, there was plot, and stuff that is really going to affect the other shows and movies. Now, I'm sure a lot of people have seen WandaVision or really have also seen Falcon and the Winter Soldier. For those who don't know, WandaVision took place roughly 3 weeks after the ending of Endgame. And now here we are with Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which currently blanking out on when this takes place. It's either 3 months after or 6 months after. I kind of want to say it's 6 months, but I could be wrong. But either or, it's been 3 to 6 months after the ending of Avengers Endgame. So kind of just going through a brief synopsis, and I don't want to weigh on it too heavily. We started off with the way that the episode before that ended, which was Bucky seeing that Io, who is one of the Dora Milaje from the Black Panther world, she has been tracking Zemo ever since his breakout, and she was talking to Bucky. And Bucky manages to buy some time, and she gives him 8 hours, which I will tell you in the show, it feels a lot more than 8 hours. But, so she gives him 8 hours before they come in to take Zemo away. Then we have, Bucky returning to the hotel, trying to lose Io, and he kind of informs them about the Dora Milaje. And, which we also had a flashback about, specifically Io ridding Bucky of his mind control that Hydra had implemented on him for so many years. So then, once again, we go back to the hotel, and Bucky warns them about the Dora Milaje, and so they need to quickly find Carly, and they do have a brief lead with Mama Donya, who is kind of acted as, I guess, an adoptive mother for, a few dozen people easily, maybe even more worldwide, but, we really only know from the funeral scene later in the episode that it probably was about a few dozen. So, they go to an area which they know that she was in, and they're asking around. People literally are running away from Bucky and Sam. But then you have Zemo, who I have really grown to like. And I know he is a bit villainous, but I actually think that I like him the best out of any of the characters in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So he manages to talk to some of the children who kind of know the secrets of everything that's going on, and one of the little girls agrees that she will show Zemo where the memorial or funeral is taking place. They later are about to head out when Battlestar and John Walker appear, and they aren't really receptive to the idea of checking into Carly because they just want to take Zemo. Now, I just gotta say, I think all of the John Walker hatred is very, very unfair, even to the point that the actor has literally gotten death threats, which is absolutely insane. Like, the fact that people dislike a character for seriously no reason, and they're sending the actor death threats, like, that's ridiculous. That is absolutely insane. And for anyone listening in, if you're one of these people, he's just an actor. He literally has no, there's nothing to it. He's acting in a role. If anything, and I'm not saying that you should send death threats, but if anything, you should be blaming the writers for creating this character. But he's also a character in the comics as well. So it's just really unfair. But you know what? I actually kind of like John Walker. I see that he's a really good guy, but even he has his own struggles. And you can see him hinted, throughout the episodes. But this episode was, whoa. Yeah, it was a big John Walker moment, which we'll get to shortly. So they obviously go to the memorial service. Sam, given his experience as a grief counselor, especially with soldiers more specifically, I liked his plan that he's going to talk to Carly, and it seemed to work, but John Walker got impatient, which I'm sure was part of him thinking back to Afghanistan with him losing all of his people. He's really trying to take the role on seriously. Zemo escapes, and then Carly gets confronted, then Carly runs away, and there's this big scene where they're all running, and then Zemo and Carly kind of come face to face where Zemo shoots Carly. Now, keep in mind that Carly has the super soldier serum, so in a day or two, she'll be 100% again. Like, her wounds and her body regenerate at a pretty fast rate. Then after that, Zemo is about to get taken by the Dora Milaje, but John Walker and Battlestar are like, no, he's coming with us. Obviously, acting as a sort of a world authority. But he gets his butt beat by the Dora Milaje. Falcon was able to fight a little, a little bit with the Dora, better than John or Battlestar, which I find to be a little unbelievable. I really don't think any of them would really be able to have much of a fight against the Dora. Bucky, on the other hand, I mean, he also has super soldier in him, and he also has his mechanical arm, which is actually a really interesting point, a little feature that we've never known Bucky to have, which Bucky himself didn't know, but the Dora Milaje deactivated his arm, and it literally fell off his body, which, I mean, that's a huge thing, him losing literally an arm, so he can't really fight back. So with all of this, too, it kind of culminates to, Zemo escaping, and them finding Carly again because Carly had threatened Sam's sister, which was a little interesting twist, but I don't believe that Carly would have ever done it. I think she legitimately did want to talk to Sam, but I think she fully recognized that it could very easily go south. Now, with this episode, it kind of culminated in this huge fight between Carly, her super soldiers, Battlestar, John, and all of them. Now, earlier when Zemo did confront Carly, Zemo destroyed all the super soldier serums except one because John, hit him with his freaking vibranium shield, which is absolutely insane because the way that they throw that shield, and at the speed and everything like that, and given how sturdy that it's the strongest metal, these people should literally be dead, or they should literally be decapitated. He clocked Zemo with that shield, really hard on the head. Especially in the forehead region, he'd be bleeding. I mean, the forehead is a very sensitive area. You even, cut it a little bit and it's going to bleed a lot. That's why you even see wrestlers in, the WWE and stuff like that. When they get hurt, what do? They cut their forehead a bit because that's what bleeds the most and it's the most dramatic. But yeah, he would have been he was out for the count, but he would have been really messed up. And honestly, in the reality of the world, I think his head would have literally been split open or he would have been decapitated. So anyway, John took a super soldier serum then, and I literally called it after episode 1. Fairly certain I even said it in the podcast, said it to friends and family, that obviously John was going to take the super soldier serum at some point. Now, I wasn't exactly expecting him to take it this episode, but with everything going on in this episode, it just kind of drove him to the point of taking, feeling like he had no other way of really being able to do his job successfully. And part of what made Captain America so great was the super soldier serum. Captain America would not be Captain America without it. Let's be real for a second. Because all of that with him was, he had the courage to stand up against bad people, and it was all mental, but he had nothing physical. He was, seriously a weakling. I think a child could have even pushed him down before he took that serum. So yeah, it's just really interesting, because as a fight ensued, Battlestar kind of dove in the way of Carly trying to, I believe, stab John Walker, but in turn, he got thrown across the room, and I guess he broke his neck. They don't really specifically show you or tell you what happened, but the end result is that Battlestar is dead, and I was not expecting that in this show whatsoever. I wasn't sure if Battlestar even died in the comics, but even so, but I think it makes sense because obviously at the end of the day, we all know Sam is going to become Captain America by the end of the series. So we just need to figure out how Sam gets to point A to point B. Now, after Battlestar dies, all of Carly's super soldiers freak out because they know that John Walker has taken the serum. And not only does he have that shield, but he is also a trained fighter, where most of them probably aren't trained fighters. But they freak out and run away. So John manages to see, that they're all fleeing, and he jumps out the window to chase one of them down, and he murders the one super soldier, Nico, in cold blood, which was a pretty crazy moment because not only did he do it in broad daylight, but he also did it in the public with, like, probably 100 people watching him and recording. So that is going to have serious implications for the next couple episodes. Now, I also thought it was going to be 8 episodes this season, but I thought it was going to be 8 episodes, but I actually found out earlier today that it's actually only going to be 6 episodes, and we just finished episode 4. And these shows, especially Falcon and the Winter Soldier, they serve as a expanded, or you could even call it a mini Marvel movie, although these shows ultimately are longer than the Marvel movies and also cost significantly more than the rest of the Marvel movies. But yeah, it's interesting because I feel like there's still so much that needs to be touched upon. But I think what's going to potentially end up happening is, obviously, as we see, Sam is the moral compass of the show. I think John Walker's going to ultimately feel guilty, and when he calms down, because I feel like he's in a sort of like a roid rage mode, he's going to realize his mistake, and I think ultimately he is going to end up giving up the shield. Now, I would love to see John Walker in the movies. I actually think he's an interesting character. I think they just need to expand upon him more, and it's going to be weird if someone really does end up taking over as Captain America, which once again I really do think is going to be Sam. But I mean, we still have a lot to see. There's still episode 5 and 6 left, which is probably still close to 2 hours, or maybe like an hour and a half, which is still, a full Marvel movie. I'm still thinking that Sharon is going to be the broker. Because I mean, we don't know who the broker is. It's got to be someone who we know. And clearly it's not Zemo. So I think the only twist that would make sense is for her to be the broker. But yeah, so just to touch upon little final thoughts. I think, with John Walker, we get a little bit more of complexity out of him, a little bit more of three-dimensionalism with him, because of what he struggles with in Afghanistan and what he struggles with as being Captain America, because it's a large seat to fill, and he's just a regular guy. So I think the complexity of his character is already starting to show. I'm really liking Sam too, but I think he's more of your standard good guy, and I think generally speaking those characters are pretty boring. That's why I think Captain America is probably my least favorite of all the Marvel people. He's boring. He's your quintessential hero, But anyway, we got a lot to see unfold in these last 2 episodes, and Zemo, I'm sure, will come back in a big way, and I think Zemo's my favorite character, and I would like to see him stick around for a bit longer and not be locked up. So on that note, we are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I'll be talking about The Queen's Gambit.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. Keith keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
All right, and we are back. So we just finished our last segment talking about Falcon and the Winter Soldier. We will probably continue to go on that until the end of the first season. So we only have 2 more episodes of that. I like to kind of start the beginning of the week off with that, given that Falcon and the Winter Soldier is airing at the end of the week. Which then I'll have a different opener for our Thursday podcast. So moving on to our next segment, we are going to talk about the Queen's Gambit. Now, I would be stunned, absolutely stunned, if someone has not heard of the Queen's Gambit before. The Queen's Gambit appeared on Netflix. Last year, it appeared on Netflix. And very quickly, I believe it was within maybe 2 weeks, it officially became the most watched scripted miniseries that Netflix has ever aired to this date. The show has 7 episodes, so unfortunately it's a pretty quick binge for most of you guys. I stretched it out over the course of about a month, maybe, which even that kind of sucked. But it's so good. It's based off of a book of the same name by the author Walter Tevis, I believe is how you say his last name. The show quickly gained a lot of awards. It, especially somewhat recently at the Golden Globes ceremony, it was nominated for a few awards, and it ended up winning 2 awards, and was also nominated for a number of other awards for other shows, and gained a lot of, really a lot of recognition. So the show itself has quite a large cast. There's not really many people that are consistently in the show, as the show does move between a number of time periods. But the number one person who plays the main character, Elizabeth Harmon, although she goes by Beth, is Anya Taylor-Joy. Now, most of you guys probably know her from, her breakout role, The Witch, which was spelled or stylized as VVITHC. She also starred in a BBC show called Peaky Blinders, which I believe is on Netflix and probably even Amazon Prime too to watch. And she also was one of the leading characters by the name of Casey Cook, I believe that was her character's name, in both Split and Glass, which are the second and third movies in the Unbreakable trilogy, or the Glass trilogy, depending on what you want to call it, which those are M. Night Shyamalan movies. We also have a reoccurring character in the show. He's introduced, I believe, in the second episode, which is Harry Melling. Most people probably won't recognize his name unless you're a huge Harry Potter fan, in which Harry Melling played the character of Dudley Dursley, I believe is their name in the Harry Potter movies, which was Harry Potter's bratty younger cousin, because he obviously lived with his aunt and uncle and his cousin. Man, he looks so different in this show, because in the movies, when you always saw him, he was that, short, plump little boy, and he was also freaking so mean. But in the Queen's Gambit, he's kind of on the taller side, and he is very, very thin. So just another, person to look out for. And then you also have Thomas Brody Sangster, who, depending on your age, you might know him from the Nanny McPhee movies. He played, or the Nanny McPhee movie. I don't know if he's in the sequel, but he was in the Nanny McPhee movie as the main little boy. He also was in Game of Thrones, for any Game of Thrones watchers. He played Jojen Reed, who was a warg and was trying to help Bran get to the Three-Eyed Raven north of the Wall. So he played Jojen Reed. And then he also was in the Maze Runner movies, if anyone saw those 3 movies. I can't remember his character's name, but he's got a very particular look about him, so you should definitely know who he is if you see him. Now, I'm sure also some people are kind of wondering the whole thing about the Queen's Gambit, which is something that most people wonder throughout the show, and they only really, I think, explain the Queen's Gambit itself in the show, maybe like in a single line or two. But the Queen's Gambit is a chess move. It is more specifically, it's an opening chess move in which white, which always goes first in the game of chess, you have your fourth white pawn, or your D pawn, moving to the fourth numbered slot, then which the black moves the same spot, and then white moves their other pawn right next to their other white space, which then allows for the black piece to easily take the white pawn, kind of forcing them to take it, otherwise you're going to lose that pawn. But I believe the whole reason is it's kind of forcing black to move up much earlier than they need to. It's considered to be like one of the oldest chess moves in chess, one of the oldest opening ones. But anyway, that's kind of enough about that. So the show itself, without getting into too many details, and I might go into a little bit of spoilers for the first episode, but when I get to that point, I will definitely let you know. But the show's very interesting because the show itself follows Elizabeth Harmon, who once again is played by Anya Taylor-Joy. There is another child actress, or because Anya's actually like 24 or 25, but there's a child actress who plays the young Elizabeth Harmon, where the show actually starts out on. She's about, or the character herself is 9 years old. As for the actress, I'm honestly not sure how old she is. But it's really interesting because there are a lot of reoccurring themes and motifs throughout the show. So Elizabeth Harmon herself is a bit of a savant, and you get to know her character and where she comes from as a person from her mother in the flashbacks. Now, her mom, while they grew up like really poor and they grew up in a trailer and stuff like that, her mom definitely has some mental issues, but she herself is also a genius. And she has some sort of relationship with who you do know to be Elizabeth's father, but I guess because of her genius, she's a little bit crazy, which is something that I feel like you do often see in real life and other shows, is that with that level of genius, oftentimes comes a bit of mental unstability. So it's very interesting that you see that, and you almost see it mirrored in her daughter, but it manifests in a very, very different way. She's also really closed off, really quiet, very calculating, and she's very quick to anger, which is also something really interesting that plays out throughout the show as she gets further and further into her chess career. The show also does tackle, it does tackle mental health and emotional health, because that is a huge part of a number of these characters in the show, as the show takes place, generally speaking, in the 1960s, but also in the mid-1950s as well. So the show opens up with the death of her mom, and she's put into an orphanage, a Catholic or Christian orphanage, however you would like to really define it. I don't know if it's one or the other, but we can easily say Christian as a general descriptor. So back in the 1950s, for a little bit of context, it was very normal for, actually really even all the way up to like the 1980s, really normal for people to take like tranquilizers, so to speak, like Valium and stuff like that. So in the show, they give all of the girls medication. Like, these girls are taking medication day in, day out, day in, day out. And so it's really weird to see that was kind of just normal. And I guess it's also kind of crazy in today's day and age, because we do oftentimes really overgive people medicine, but unfortunately with a lot of the medicine now, we give like children antipsychotic medicine and crap like that, which really alters your brain chemistry as you're growing up, especially during your like years of puberty. That can really mess with you. So With the show, though, they give these kids tranquilizers, and which is often just shown in the show as a green pill. So it gives you the character from a very young age this addictive tendency, or at least it's what really starts off her addictive tendencies. So she becomes addicted to the drugs. As the episode goes on, they do stop giving out those drugs as a part of a new law that's in effect. So a slight spoiler, I apologize. I didn't mean to actually say anything too spoilery this soon. But yeah, so it's just really interesting, the dynamics of real life that are shown in this show. Another character that we have in the show is Mr. Scheibel, who is the kind of quiet loner janitor at the girls' orphanage, who he, in a sense, becomes a very early on mentor for Elizabeth. He is the whole reason why Elizabeth even gets into chess in the first place, as she goes down there to do like cleaning that a teacher might ask her to. I believe, if I remember correctly, she was dusting off chalk erasers in the basement. So she goes, and that's where she discovers chess. And Mr. Scheibel is a huge fan of chess, a very patient game at that, so really factors into his character, as we can see. So given that Beth is kind of a little bit lost, she's a little bit strange, she's a little quiet, she does meet another girl at the orphanage who, becomes her best friend. And also the girl, because it is a relevant detail, she is a black girl too, and she's a little bit on the older side. So oftentimes with a lot of orphanages or foster children, the older you are, the least likely you are going to get adopted, which you even see that with animals as well, like dogs, which is why you have movements for dogs of the adopt, don't shop, variety, I guess you can say. But also back in the 1950s, how many people are really going to want to adopt a teenage black girl? So it kind of just solidifies her place in the orphanage. And so she ends up becoming a close friend of Elizabeth's in the orphanage. So throughout the show, you do also see that we jump through many time periods. Almost every episode, you at least get like a scene from the mid-1950s, because there's a lot of like moments that are relevant to Elizabeth's state of mind, or some sort of relevant story plot where they go back to when her mom was talking to her when she might have been in bed, or a moment between her mom and a strange man who, once again, from the second he's introduced that he is the father, because it's said in the dialogue. So you have like a bunch of little moments like that. And then the show really kicks off once you get to about the second episode, I believe it is, and they go to 1966. And then as the show progresses, they might jump a few months here, a few months there, and then towards the final episodes, they jump, a year later, then in 1968, and I believe the show ends around 1969. So it's just really interesting, though. The whole show is about, Beth's whole goal of trying to become the best chess player in the whole world. Which also is really another interesting dynamic, because in the show, and probably actually even in the time, one of the best chess players in the world, or many of the best chess players in the world, were all Russian. So you obviously have a lot of 1950s, communist scare elements. So it's a really interesting factor, and I think it's honestly a really relevant detail to know going into the show. It gives you a little bit better of context, because they don't really formally address it until about the fourth or fifth episode. So actually, I kind of gave a little bit of some spoilers, nothing really big plot-wise, but I think I might actually just end it there, and maybe next podcast or the podcast after, I'll maybe go into the details of the first half of the season. So if you haven't seen the show, I would definitely recommend it. It's really well done. it does not linger in one area for too long, as there's a lot to cover, and in the reality of the show, there's probably a lot of down moments in between Beth and her tournaments and her other craziness of what's going on in her life. So definitely watch it, and, maybe I'll address it, a couple podcasts from now, and we'll dive into the first half of the season. But on that note, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I'll be talking about my weekly sitcoms and how they're kind of in rare form recently. They've all actually been really good and very plot. They've been, really moving forward the plot, so stay tuned for that, and then we'll end on The Wilds, which I really think people should stick around for.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
All right, and we are back. So, we've already talked about Marvel's Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Then we moved on to The Queen's Gambit, a little overview. And like I did say, I am considering, diving more into that into the future. Maybe first half, one episode, and, then for the second half, I'll do another podcast episode as well. So, now I kind of want to touch upon my weekly sitcoms. So, depending on how long I sort of drone on about this will depend on which sitcoms I really will end up hitting. But I plan on, at least talking about the Goldbergs, Young Rock, Blackish, and maybe Mixedish as well. If I get the time, I want to talk about also a new show called Home Economics, which I just watched the first episode last night. So, the whole reason I'm bringing this up, and I'm sure there's a lot of sitcom, viewers out there, and there's just in general a ton of sitcoms. But it's weird, the past, few weeks, the sitcoms have actually been pretty good. And not to say that normally a lot of these sitcoms are bad, but the issue with most of these sitcoms are that they kind of fall into this like hole of sort of the same stories, or safely finding, its format without really pushing things forward or trying things new. And you know what? Sometimes when you try things new, things kind of fall flat, and it's not the greatest, but I think I would appreciate something new rather than the same old stuff. And, I even briefly talked about during the whole franchise fatigue, I talked about The Simpsons and Bob's Burgers and how they are, and even The Simpsons has been getting a little bit better with its most recent episodes, too. But one of the biggest offenders of sitcoms that I think have really not been performing the greatest is the Goldbergs. So with the Goldbergs, the very first season itself was rated very average reviews, if I remember correctly. And even I myself tried to watch the first season of the Goldbergs when it came out, and I wasn't really a huge fan. But I ended up going back, and I really ended up enjoying it. And so the Goldbergs had probably about 4 seasons in my mind, definitely the first 4 seasons, with definitely seasons 2, 3, and 4 really being on their A game. The plots were fresh, the characters still felt very fresh. Beverly was like, I don't want to call her the saving grace, because then that would almost indicate that the rest of the show was not that great, but she was like the highlight. She was really carrying that show. Especially, I feel like the show loves to curse, and they like to bleep out the curse words, but they do it in such a shocking manner that it works as shock humor. And I was loving that, but it's become its own little trope in the show now, which it still gets me every now and again. But anyway, yeah, seasons 2 through 4 were pretty good. Season 5 was also pretty solid, but I think that's when we started to get a lot more of the repetitiousness of the individual episodes. And then I think I really remember thinking with season 6, like, wow, I've seen this before. I've seen this quite a bit before. Wow, this really feels like a pretty big dip in quality. And then last year, season 7 hit, and I just remember heavily criticizing a number of the episodes and just being like, oh my God, we've literally seen this plot play out like 8 times before. And not only did we see it play out 8 times before, but it's like you literally just recycled this plot, but with your different children. More specifically, what I'm really referring to is Beverly overstepping her boundaries as a parent. And 9 times out of 10, it really is Adam she's doing it with, who is the youngest of the kids and is kind of the star of the show, as well as the real Adam in real life is the one who created the show. But then, yeah, they use that plot again, and they use it with Erica, and then they use it with Barry, and boom, now you just had the same episode 3 times in one season that we also have already seen a few times before in prior seasons. And then it even happens again in the same season. And so I track all my TV shows on TV Time, and oftentimes I'll make comments on the episodes. And, I see stuff online as well with different articles and on Reddit and social media. And I know I'm not alone in thinking this. The Goldbergs has really dug itself into that hole. Now, it's funny, though, because we oftentimes do give cartoons a pass when they do this kind of stuff. I think a huge example is The Simpsons, for instance. Family Guy does it every now and again. Bob's Burgers kind of does it. But yeah, we tend to give cartoons a pass. I think a huge reason is, we already suspend our disbelief because we're watching something that's literally like hand-drawn or computer animated, something that's not real. But also, The Simpsons itself, I don't know. It's something that's really hard to describe. So with live-action stuff, live-action sitcoms, it's harder to give them the pass. So we just finished up episode 16 last week with the Goldbergs. And we have episode 17 coming up, and really we're coming actually at the close of the season. But I would say episodes 13, 14, 15, and 16 have been a big breath of fresh air. I really have been enjoying it. So episode 13 was an episode called Ships Ahoy, and it really focused not on the actual family itself as a unit or as a pair, but it focused on, well, as usual, Barry, thinking that he's way better than he really is, and he wants to try out for the Ships Ahoy pageant, which is like a male pageant. And Jeff, Erica's boyfriend, is there too, and Erica says, he's not really the type to do that, and while she sees the greatness in him, no one else will. Which really factors into a huge plot that has been going on in these past 4 episodes. So, anyway, you see that, and it's it's something that, Jeff ends up proving to himself and with Erica, and he ends up winning. Then we have the whole love triangle episode, which is a little bit ridiculous, but it's another Barry, Jeff, and Erica episode. And this time, Jeff takes his girlfriend to this show, this famous Philadelphia talk show, and Barry gets really mad because he and Jeff are the ones that watch it, whereas Jeff only took Erica because that's his girlfriend. And so he tries to get back at Barry by dating his sister, who are two people who can't stand each other. But I remember thinking in the beginning of the episode, oh my God, Barry and Jeff's sister, Joanna, are the same person. They are the male and female versions of themselves. And I was just like, holy crap. Like, they actually could kind of make a good couple, but also it'd be a little weird given that Jeff and Erica date and then Barry and Joanna date. But anyway, it ends with Barry and Jeff repairing their relationship, but it's not really your typical feud that Barry has with the rest of his friends. Beverly was an interesting Beverly-centric job episode, but a little bit of recycled stuff, but still something a little bit new. And then the most recent episode, Couple Off, which was Barry and Joanna, who aren't dating as they always say, but they are dating, and then Jeff and Erica dating, and they're kind of comparing each other as couples, which then kind of proves that Erica is a bit selfish. And so it was really interesting because it ends up in their breakup. And even aside from that, and I focused on those plots because that was the relevant little arc that they've been introducing. We also got a little bit of memorial from the guy who plays Pops in the show. I believe his name is George Segal. He passed away, and I believe this was his final episode, which was a shame, but it was nice that they got to put him in the episode. There's even a line that he delivers in the beginning of the episode, or more specifically, where Adam delivers, and that's a rap for Pops, which they obviously did not know that was going to be his final episode, but it's a little eerie to hear. But anyway, so yeah, the main point I was actually about to get to is the fact that they finally really addressed the Goldbergs' wealth. Which it did come out a couple months ago that the real Goldbergs were wealthy, very, very wealthy. They practically lived in a mansion. So yeah, they address it, and it's talking about how Bria comes from a is raised by a single mom, and Adam is spoiled, and he doesn't realize, the privilege he has by being with a very wealthy family. And as usual, Adam is extremely annoying, but he gets a job, which is something he's never had to do before. And I think this could potentially be something that really moves forward, his plot. So I'm really enjoying everyone's, stories being pushed forward in the Goldbergs. And honestly, at this point, given how much time I've talked about the Goldbergs, I think I'm actually just going to end out this segment on the Goldbergs instead of talking about the other sitcoms. Maybe I'll just make quick points about them. But anyway, it's really funny too because Adam and Bria, who Bria is the pretty girl, the very, very popular girl in school, she's been dating Adam, and it feels very, very unrealistic. Now, I think the way that it was revealed in the post-credit scene, where they usually reveal Adam's real life, he was really friends with Bria B in real life, but I don't know if they actually dated, as well as if Bria is as popular as she is in the show, which Adam even sits with the popular kids, and Adam's other geeky friends sit with the popular kids as well, which just really does not feel very realistic. But I mean, I do get it. It is a sitcom. But it's funny, though. They've been dating since, I think, towards the end of last season. But even in the very first episode of the season, when his whole family goes on vacation and they all bring their significant others, Bria is constantly annoyed by Adam. Like, I genuinely don't see how this relationship works. Bria just does not like to seem, Bria does not seem to like any of Adam's typical mannerisms, his quirks, and those are all the things that make Adam Adam. So, once again, why are they together? It does not make any logical sense to me. So I kind of hope that I see a breakup between them, and maybe that's also what helps drive Adam's story forward, because Adam's also a senior in high school right now, and I think with him being off at college and all the children being off at college and the mom being an empty nester, I think that's also going to factor into her storyline next season, because as far as we know, the show has not been canceled, although I do think Adam leaving high school is a good stopping off point, especially with, generally speaking, how stale this show has gotten. Which also, a couple other quick notes about the Goldbergs. We all know from the spin-off series that Barry in the 90s is single and he wants to get back together with Lainey, and they do get back together. So we know this relationship with Joanne is not going to work, which is kind of a shame that it was spoiled for us in Schooled. But I still am here for their relationship. I'm curious to see where it goes, forward with. And also, if they do end the show, we still have potentially another 3 to 5 episodes left. Maybe, if we're lucky, a 6th or 7th, but I highly doubt it, given that this episode in a couple days is going to be episode 17. I think there's enough time to create the distance between Jeff and Erica and wrap up that storyline, because we also know from School that they end up together anyway. So I'm finally happy, and I have a renewed sense of life on this show. And I'm sure someone out there is probably going to ask, well, if you didn't like it, for the past couple seasons, why do you continue to watch it? And you know what? It had its moments. I still did enjoy it. And sometimes, honestly, I like to fill my time with, mindless TV if I'm not, working or doing something productive anyway. I need those moments where I can, drone out. But oftentimes with TV shows, there's not a lot of TV shows that I quit watching. It's only been really the past year or two that I've actually stopped watching a number of my TV shows. Or I'll start a TV show and then stop it because I don't like it. So to answer that, it would be, I want to see how it ends. I've already been in the journey for 8 years now. If there's only another season, I want to finish it. Anyway, I guess that's actually what we're going to conclude for one of my weekly sitcoms. So maybe, in a couple days when the other episode goes up, I will talk about the other ones that I meant to talk about. So we're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about the Amazon Prime show, The Wilds.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back. So, we have already talked about Marvel's Falcon and the Winter Soldier. We've talked about Netflix's The Queen's Gambit. And we were supposed to talk about the weekly sitcoms that I watch, but kind of went on a big Goldberg's tangent, if you will. Just had a lot of thoughts that I guess I didn't realize were all there and had to get them off of my chest. So, with this final segment, we're going to be talking about Amazon Prime's original show called The Wilds. I'm going to, for this episode, try and keep it as spoiler-free as possible, very similarly to how I did with the Queen's Gambit. But I kind of just want to go over a brief overview, maybe let you know some statistics and some future updates that I have been hearing about the show. So, as I did say, The Wilds is an Amazon show. It has, currently it has one season. It was released, believe on December 11th of last year, and it has 10 episodes. They all were released at once. There is currently, I believe, a possible second season. I don't know if they've officially started filming or whatnot. Oh, no. Sorry. There is a second season. I believe it was literally 8 days after the first season dropped. They said that they were going to do a season 2, which the only recent news that I've even heard about season 2 was that they switched filming locations from New Zealand to somewhere in Australia, which, I mean, they're pretty close to each other, but I'm very curious why they did that. The only thing that I can even possibly think of is the fact that I know New Zealand was like one of the first countries during the pandemic to get their numbers down to 0, given that they are one huge island off of Australia. It makes sense that they might want to keep things locked down for a little bit longer, because I think for them, life has returned to normal for New Zealanders. So that's really cool. But I think that's the whole reason why they probably switched from New Zealand to Australia. And I'm sure given, that they're located in the same region of the world, they could easily find one location to mimic another. So anyway, on to what the show is about. So, The Wilds is a drama. More specifically, I would make, an easy argument at that it is a teenage drama. The show focuses around a group of girls, all teenagers in high school. I believe most of them are supposed to be seniors in high school, but I think maybe one or two of them could be sophomores or juniors, but I'm more leaning towards the junior side of things. So the main character of the show is a girl named Leah. Now, Leah is, before I actually get into that, there are 10 episodes in the first season, and each episode is actually focused around one of the characters, as that character gets flashbacks, but also as they're being interviewed by FBI agents, I believe, is what they are, as they recount the story of, like, what's been going on the island. So you get, everything in order to when it happens, but each of the girls, they have their own episode when the episode is relevant to them in their individual dilemma. Which I'm going to circle back to that in a minute, but let me introduce the players. So first off, we have Leah. Leah is a young girl. I believe she's 17 years old. She's in high school. She goes to this, private art school. She is in the high school. She's very, very much a loner. She really only has, one friend. She is very obsessive, and she's got this, I'd almost say she's got this big romanticized version of romance. So she falls in love with an author who comes to visit their school, and she tells the author that she is 18 years old when she was at the time 16 and just recently turned 17 as their relationship hit, and he's a full-grown adult. But they break up prior to her being on the island, which causes a lot of internal grief. Then you have Shelby. She is a beauty pageant, Texan who comes from a highly conservative family. So I'm not going to dip into her too much because it will breach into spoiler territory. As with most of these characters, I'm not going to dive into. Then you have Fatten, who is a really hardworking girl. She goes to the same school as Leah does. So I believe she's a really good celloist, hardworking student, but she's also a bit promiscuous and she likes to have fun on the weekends. But her parents are very controlling. She is also, I believe she is like Pakistani American. So we have a little bit of representation there, which is really cool. Then we have Dot, who actually also goes to school with Shelby. And her internal issues is her dad has a terminal illness and is dying, and she has to take care of him. And they also don't come from, wealth. They are kind of on the poorer side, whereas Shelby definitely comes from a little bit more money, and Fatten definitely comes from money. Leah is about middle class. Then you have Martha and Tony. They're best friends. They obviously go to the same school, and all these girls, they go, or all these pairs of girls go to different schools. So Martha and Tony go to a school somewhere in the Midwest. They both live, well, more specifically, Martha lives, I believe, on an Indian reservation ground or Native American reservation ground. And I believe Tony is also Native American as well, which, once again, very interesting representation. I actually really enjoy that. Each of them have their own problems. Martha definitely comes off as more of the carefree, innocent person who needs to be taken care of. But she's got more of a bigger past than, the show lets on. And Tony is a lesbian, and it has caused her a lot of grief in her life. It's caused her, more specifically, a lot of anger, which then she lashes out in many different ways. And then the last two are Nora and Rachel. Now, Nora and Rachel are sisters. I almost want to say they are twin sisters. I'm genuinely having a hard time remembering that, because the last time I watched the show, or I watched the whole season in mid to late January. So yeah, they're sisters, and Nora she shows signs of being a highly functioning autistic girl. It's never explicitly stated, which it has caused just a tad bit of controversy for some of the viewers to the show people, the show creators, developers, writers, because there are those similarities there, and people would have just preferred that they casted someone who was autistic, which is the same thing that, Sia got heat for, although that is a whole different story, because that girl was low-functioning autistic, and she is autistic, whereas there's not, specifically stated. But anyway, so she's really smart, and so are both of their parents, and not to say that Rachel isn't smart, but Rachel's more of the athlete in the family, and so as she's in high school and her body continues to change, she doesn't have the perfect body for diving anymore, which causes a lot of mental issues in which she tries to change. So the whole premise of the show is that you have these group of girls, these colorful group of girls with very varied backstories and very varied backgrounds, who all believe they are on their way to a women's retreat, a women's empowerment retreat in Hawaii. But their plane crashes in the middle of the ocean, and a couple of the girls wake up literally in the middle of the ocean, while some of the other girls are more towards the land, and they wash up to the island. And so it's kind of about them surviving and, female dynamics and, just these girls who are very much immature, generally speaking. I mean, some of them are actually on the more mature side, but them dealing with each other. And there's a line that's even used in the trailer, and I believe it's also used in the first episode by the main character, Leah, which I'd really say that it's an ensemble cast, but even in an ensemble cast, there's still one character that just kind of stands out above the rest. But with Leah, she says, being on that island, don't get me wrong, being on that island is very traumatic, but the real trauma was being a teenage girl. Which, I mean, is a little corny. It's a little melodramatic, if you ask me, but the truth of the statement is still very much present in the show, and that as a teenage girl, and obviously I'm not a girl and was never a teenage girl, but you do have to recognize that there are certain societal standards and societal pressures that women feel, especially women when they are teenagers feel. And so it's something that is addressed in their characters. So the show is also really interesting because I feel like, aside from the fact that it really isn't actually made for my demographic, because you also have to acknowledge that all TV shows are made for a certain demographic. They try to hit a certain audience. And the show is definitely not in my demographic, but they tackle a lot of relevant themes that could potentially prove to be very cathartic or healing or helpful to any girl watching this show. They do tackle, the themes of love and topics of obsessiveness and appearance issues, mental issues, body issues, suicide, sexual abuse, terminal illness, the process of being an orphan, or, I don't know, finding out your parents' dark secrets. It tackles very varied subjects. And like I said, you have, a group of women and of many different backgrounds, of lower class, of upper class, of middle class, of upper middle class, of different political ideologies. So it's really good in that sense. Now, I feel like despite the show, what's the word I'm looking for? Not, despite the show presenting itself to teenage women or even young adult women, I feel like for the second season of the show, depending on where they end up taking it, because there is a bit of a twist ending, I feel like the show should move towards a more mature route, and start to not treat it so much for young kids. I'm not talking about making it very adult, but treat these subject matters and the dialogue and the relationships with a little bit more of a mature presence. And oftentimes I feel like kids and teenagers actually respond very well to that, because oftentimes when you make shows for kids or teenagers, they end up dumbing down things because they think that the average audience can't really understand or does not have the mental capacity to understand something. But I oftentimes think that we do not give teenagers and kids the credit they deserve when it comes to things like this. I think people really know a lot more. So I would like to see it move towards a more mature route for the second season, and I think that could even potentially raise its ratings and potentially even draw in new audiences. And, it's funny, I talk about Lost a lot because it's my favorite show, and I've been, starting to cover Manifest, and this is another one of those shows where Manifest, I think one of its big flaws is you don't have, very well-rounded super-dimensional characters, whereas Lost did, and Lost was very much a character piece. I feel like The Wilds is very much a character piece. And there is a mystery, revolving these girls. Same thing with how Lost had multiple mysteries revolving those characters. But But yeah, we also jump between other characters not on the island, although most of our time is spent on the island, and multiple, time periods, so to speak. We have the past, we have what is almost seems to be the present, but is actually the recent past, and then we have the actual real present. And it also is, while it hasn't really received award recognition, widespread award recognition, critics have given it actually pretty high reviews. It generally holds about a 7.5 to 8 out of 10, which is actually, most people don't exactly see it as a good rating, but that is a pretty good rating because 10 would mean perfection, and what shows and movies are really perfect. In addition to that, it holds a 92% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it did receive a nomination, although I don't know if it officially won or not, because I don't know when the GLAAD awards are held, but it received an award for Outstanding Drama Series on the GLAAD Awards, which, for those who don't know, GLAAD is Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. You even have, it's been going on for years, even, Seinfeld, which for some people who don't know really how Seinfeld works, some people look at Seinfeld as being problematic, which it really isn't. It actually exposes problematic people. But even that show won a GLAAD award back in the 90s for actually a phenomenal episode you should check into. But I think that's more or less it on the Wilds, and I might, like I said, just like Queen's Gambit, I might actually cover the first half of the series versus the second half of the series in future episodes. But on that note, we are going to end it there. So, thank you for listening to the GSMC Television Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show, write a nice review because it really helps us, and also if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Television Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.